All right, it's time to get this started, I think. Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Sharp, the director of the Dixon Gallery and Gardens right here in Memphis. And I have Aaron Reardon with me, and it's our pleasure to welcome you to the first virtual installment of Dixon Home Tours. This program was designed as a benefit of Dixon membership, especially for you. Everyone on this Zoom supports the Dixon, and I thank you very sincerely for staying with us during this incredibly challenging year. I'm pleased that so many of you have elected to share the evening with us. When we came up with the idea of inviting private collectors to lead a virtual tour of the works of art they own, we were not entirely sure anyone would agree to do it. So we started by drafting a list of our most promising victims. And of course, we put our dear friends, Susan and John Horseman, at the top of that sheet of paper. Susan and John are simply the best. I have been asking them to do one favor or another for the Dixon for going on 14 years now. You might remember our regional dialect exhibition in 2009, a show of more than 60 paintings from their collection, and the modern dialect show in 2012, where we borrowed 70 more. And by the way, those two exhibitions traveled to 13 venues collectively, so John and Susan were without their art for as much as 2 years at a time. And then, rather than run and hide from us, as any reasonable person would, in 2017, John and Susan did the extraordinary thing of presenting the Dixon with a gift of 27 paintings and sculpture, literally transforming our collection in any number of ways. Now, the art collecting habits of the Horsemans have never stopped evolving, at any time that I've known them. When I met them 16 years ago, they pursued early 20th century paintings by artists working in the Cleveland area, where they both are originally from. They bought examples from the St. Genevieve School as well. St. Genevieve is just south of St. Louis, where John and Susan have now lived for many, many years. And they also collected Brown County, Indiana painters, really interesting artists where they frequently vacationed. From that original collection, they began to focus on the artists of the American scene from the 1920s into the 1940s, a largely overlooked period painting, that representational painting that described the struggles and joys of the period of the Great Depression. During the last decade, John and Susan's collecting priorities have changed again. While remaining committed to artists who had something meaningful to say about justice and equality in this country, the Horseman's collecting has moved closer to the present moment, focusing on painters of the civil rights struggle of the 1950s and 60s, women artists of the first feminist era, and contemporary artists who are carrying those values into the future. Their journey through the art world has been an utterly fascinating one, and it's been our pleasure to be just a small part of that trek. Just a little point of business. Please send me your questions for John and Susan by typing them into the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I will pose those questions on your behalf to John and Susan at the conclusion of the tour. So find that Q&A button and feel free to click it at any time. And with that, I give you our great friends, Susan and John Horseman, and a tour of their marvelous, incredible private collection.
Welcome, Dixon, and all of you. My wife Susan and I are delighted to have you come and see number 11. It's an art space that we've spent the last couple of years putting together. I think it's really fitting, though, that the Dixon will be coming through here. You're our first guests. 12 years ago in 2008, it was the Dixon that organized and did the first exhibition of a part of our collection. So what better way for us to christen number 11 here than to have all of you, our friends from the Dixon, come and join us. So what I thought we would do today is just take a look through the space, and then Susan and I will talk about some of the individual paintings. And as I said, we're excited and welcome. I should mention before we go any further, we have our crack production crew here today. Anastasia Kinegopolo, who's running the camera. She is the curator of our collection, and also helping with the technical production today is Melissa Wolf, who is the curator of American art at the St. Louis Art Museum. So they get all the credit or all the blame. Anyhow, number 11 came about because we were running out of space for paintings that we wanted to hang in our home and in my office. And so we had been thinking about some other spaces. And as it turned out, as I said a couple of years ago, our next door neighbors decided to sell their home. And so Susan and I took a look at it, and we decided that that would make a good opportunity as a space for us to have some additional art. In addition, it also has a swimming pool, so that was nice for our family.
Very family friendly.
Yes, so I think what this you're about to see, number 11, is a combination pool house art space. And so, again, we'll take a look through. We spent a couple of years really thinking about how to do this because it is a home, and so there are some limitations, but we've worked very hard, and with the help of a lot of really talented and qualified people, been able, we think, to do a pretty good job of putting this together and transforming it from a home into a wonderful space for art. So as we come in, you'll begin to see a number of paintings, and we'll mention, as I said, some of the artists. I think, again, I want to give you a theme for our collection. We feel that our collection represents artists who should be known and art that should be seen. Many of the artists in the 50s, 60s, and 70s who were either African American or women were just sort of forgotten in the story that's told of American art at that time. They were left out of the canon. And so it's always been interesting to us to go out and to look for and find those artists. Certainly we all know now that a lot of history didn't tell the whole truth. And so we've worked hard in our own little way to try to redress some of that by bringing here some of the artists. And again, we hope that you'll enjoy this art because certainly Susan and I believe that these artists, these women, these people of color were every bit the equal of the white male artists that we all know about. And so for us, it's really been exciting. It's been a wonderful learning experience to discover these artists and really to find great masterpieces by them, which again, we believe, and we hope that you will too, that these masterpieces by these artists are really worthy to be in any museum. So why don't we get started and walk through the space. In this particular gallery, we have a couple of paintings by Spanish artists. One that is 500 years old, one that is almost 600 years old. And so that, as I said, is a new area, and we find it very exciting to sort of pair these up with more contemporary American works. Just briefly in here, as I mentioned, these are a couple Spanish Old Masters, and over here on the other wall is a contemporary American artist, Emily Chang. This is a work of hers from the 1990s. Those two, of course, are the Old Masters are depicting Mary and the Christ child, and over here Jesus with his mother Mary. Emily Chang, in a more contemporary way, over here in this beautiful work of hers, is actually depicting the Pieta. In her own way, you see her showing Mary and her dead son, and it's interesting to us when you look at here, you see the draping on this painting, and then when you look at the corresponding Old Master works, you see that same kind of work. So again, we think it's interesting to pair together these works from different periods. As I was saying, many of the works that we have in this gallery are by African Americans and women, and also we have a number of works by Native Americans. They too were left out of the canon. You wonder why, but at least the good thing is that today those omissions are, as I said, being redressed. And so in this gallery we have works by the renowned African American artist Alma Thomas. We have a work by Sam Gilliam. Over there we have a work by George Morrison, who was probably the leading African-American abstractionist back in the 50s and 60s. And we have a sculpture here by a contemporary American woman named Marcia Perry. Ed Clark, the painting that you see right here, he was another renowned African-American abstractionist of the 50s and 60s. He spent a lot of time over in Paris actually working with Joan Mitchell. He found the climate to be much more hospitable there, but again, he is starting to get a great deal of recognition today. He just died, I believe it was last year, but a great deal of recognition and renown for the quality of what he was doing. We also feel that there's a lot of contemporary work that should be seen now, and straight ahead here, this sculpture is by a young woman named Lila Barbieri. She is an immigrant or a refugee, I should say, from Uganda. She's a gay woman, and over in Uganda, that is a crime that's punishable by death. So she has come to this country and is had a remarkable career early on. She's a young woman in her 20s doing sculpture and ceramics, and this is really a wonderful work by her. Here, this is really a gallery that's devoted to women artists from the 60s on up through really right now. And you can see the different sorts of abstraction that were done here by these wonderful women artists, and also a sculpture. And as I said, for us, this has just been a wonderful, wonderful time of discovery, because these women, though they had some notoriety during the time they made these works, and they were able to exhibit in I'll say, some minor exhibitions, they really were excluded from really the most important exhibitions of their time. Many women artists, even back as recently as the 1950s, would sign their names as a man just so that they could get their works into exhibitions. Obviously things have changed for the better, but we're happy to have these wonderful works by these female artists. I'll point out just a minute here, the work right here is by a Native American artist named Fritz Shoulder. It's called Massacre at Wounded Knee 2. Shoulder, who started really to come to prominence in the 60s and 70s, was the first Native American artist to paint in more of this sort of abstract or pop style to maybe show Native Americans and parts of their lives as they really were, as opposed to the idealized paintings of Native Americans that we were used to seeing up to that point that were done primarily by white artists. So Shoulder is very, very important and really a leader in this field, and we're glad to have several of his works in our collection. Now, I know that probably all of you have heard of Andy Warhol and pop art and the leader. Well, initially when pop art first came to the fore, and even when it was sort of discovered, they forgot that there were women in pop art. This is a painting of the Beatles, done in the 1960s by an artist named Rosalind Drexler, a pop artist. And we were very, very happy to see that now in the Whitney, where they have their galleries dedicated to pop art, they have a Rosalind Drexler. And in wall text, they actually note her as being right on an equal plane with people like Andy Warhol and James Rosenquist. So again, this was a forgotten female artist who is now getting her due. This is a wonderful painting here, one of our favorites. In California, they had sort of a response to the abstract expressionist movement, which was largely initially on the East Coast, and it was referred to as California Funk. This is a work by a California artist, Wally Hedrick, who was one of the leaders of that. Hedrick is also known for the fact of he was married to Jay DeFeo. Jay DeFeo has one of the most famous paintings there is called The Rose. I think it weighs at least 1 ton. It's on display at the Whitney Museum. It's just an incredible painting. Well, when they were married, Wally Hedrick was painting this painting in the same studio right next to his wife Jay DeFeo as she was painting The Rose. This painting actually refers to we'll say sort of an infamous figure in American politics, Richard Nixon. This painting is called Dick Nixon Runs for President. Actually, it was before he became most infamous. This was in the 1960s. This was painted during the 1960 election. So there's always been political commentary in art, just as there is today. Over here, this is another woman artist renowned from the 60s and 70s, and she too was very politically engaged. Her name was Mae Stevens. This painting is called Big Daddy Vietnam. Her brother was killed in the Vietnam War, as was the case with many families there. Her father, who had fought in World War II, was very in favor of the Vietnam War, whereas she was not because of what had happened to her brother. And she painted this whole series of paintings called Big Daddy, something to do with the Vietnam War, where she would depict her father like this. And again, there was a Vietnam War exhibition that was just at the Smithsonian a couple of years ago, and one of her paintings that's owned by the Brooklyn Museum was a highlight of that. We were lucky to get this one. This was the very first painting in the Big Daddy series. So women were engaged not only in pop art and abstraction, but they were also very much engaged in protest art too, back then. This gallery is just sort of an amalgam of different styles of art and different periods. The wonderful abstraction back there is by Ed Clark, one of his fantastic works. You see on the wall here some figurative works by an artist named Mimi Gross, one of a group of guys, one of a group of women. And these were her paintings. If you look in the upper right corner, the painting of the women, that's her actually portraying herself in there. But these were also courageous paintings for a woman at that time, because not only was figurative art sort of on the outs in general in American art, it was thought to be passé because everyone was concerned with abstract work and minimalism, but she was a woman, so it was a sort of a double knock on her, if you will, at that time. But yet Mimi Gross very courageously did the art that mattered to her, and again, she is another artist who is starting to receive her due today. Then we have a younger contemporary artist here, who graduated a couple of years ago from Pratt, by the name of Jamal Peterman. Again, he is a young African-American man and has very much dedicated his work to sort of that situation of being a young black man. In America, he's done extremely well. He sold out his MFA show. His works are purchased immediately when they're finished, so we see him as just a really strong artist and one who will have a lot more to say in the coming years. And right next to that is a work by Frank Bowling. Frank Bowling, again, is, he's probably in his 80s. He was another African-American, well, actually British artist who is black, and his work was largely neglected, and now he's worked in America for the majority of his career. He is also a member of the British Empire, an award he received from the Queen. But his work now is all represented by major New York galleries. And again, another artist getting his due belatedly, but still receiving it. So here again, we have a number of women artists. I'm going to point out there to my far right, the painting that you see is called I See Red. It has the hand on it and all the collage. That is by an artist named Jean Quick-to-See Smith. She is a Native American artist. Again, someone who has been at this. She's almost 80 years old. And when I say this is someone who's finally getting her due, that's just an incredible honor for her, and you will start to hear more and more of her, about her work. And of course, what she's working on here is the condition of Native Americans in the country. The sculpture here, which is one of our favorites, this is by a California artist named Jeremy Anderson. It was done back in the 1960s. He was also part of that whole California movement. It's just a beautiful work, and one of our favorite sculptures. We also have in this room a young African-American artist named Makita Ahuya. That's a self-portrait of her there, but she is just a phenomenal painter, as is this large painting on the wall here. You can see the handling of the paint. This is an older African-American woman named Sylvia Snowden, and she's starting again to get notoriety that she just didn't receive when she was a younger woman. So it's a fantastic work. This is a painting called Kitchen Madonna by an artist named James Davis. This was painted in the 1970s, and again, it's we just think this is a artist who's fallen off the radar, but whose work is just really, we think, fantastic. And that comes around here then to a painting by an artist, Jenny Jones. She's a contemporary African-American painter. She's had a couple of really important exhibitions lately. This is a painting actually made out of a speaker, sort of the facing you would see on a music speaker. And that's what she uses as sort of her canvas. But this painting, like many of the ones that we have in here, are all painted based on jazz music that the artist is listening to. Jenny Jones is really very inspired by the music of John Coltrane, and so that really is what's moved her to do a number of these sound works that she does. So we'll come into really, I guess this is our last gallery. I'll tell you, probably some of you on this tonight are hunters, and when this was a home before the previous owner, this was his gun room. So I say that to you because I give you an idea of how we've made some changes to turn this into an art space. I think if you want to look over here and say, this painting is by an artist named Wadsworth Jarrell. It's called Liberation Soldiers. That's the Black Panthers who were represented there. We just had this painting in a major exhibition on African American art called Soul of a Nation, that was in both London and in many major museums here in the United States. And this painting was prominently featured in there, and we're very pleased to have it. I think it's important to say that in this collection that we have of work, it really comprises these narrative works, these figurative works, and also abstraction. We really think that to define the art of that period of these artists who were marginalized, you need to have all different forms of the art, and so we've tried to include all of that. This over here is a pretty major sculpture that was also in Soul of a Nation by an artist named Daniel LaRue Johnson. Again, he was painting jazz music there. And I thought, as I said, we might take some time to talk a little bit more about some of the individual paintings or works. This is not a painting, but this is a work, an assemblage by Noah Purifoy. It's called Black, Brown, and Beige, and it's called Ode to Duke Ellington. And it's just really, sometimes I look at this a lot and I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just a very powerful work. Purefoy was from Los Angeles. He would go around and just gather objects off the street and put together assemblage work like this. For the last 15 to 20 years of his life, he was out in Joshua Tree, California, outside in the desert outside of LA, and you really should look up his work, or just look up the Noah Purefoy Foundation. He spent 15 to 20 years and built this massive sculpture park on his own. And it's really works like this that all were made out of found objects. It's a place that's still extant today. It's visited widely, and so this sort of art was done a lot in Los Angeles by African Americans, and this is just a major piece by that artist. So yeah, we found this. I would say this was sort of a lucky COVID purchase. I saw this at a gallery in New York City on a wall, and I asked about it, and I was told that it was on hold for MoMA. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm never going to see that again. And the gallerist told me, laughed, he said, well, you'll see it when they have it on display. Well, then COVID hit, and everything shut down, and MoMA wasn't buying anything. And so it came off hold, and though the family wanted it to go to, ideally, to an institution like MoMA, I was there as an individual collector, and so we were able to acquire this. But so we got this earlier this year, but I will always remember this as our COVID purchase. We got very lucky. And I'll let the people from MoMA come and look at it if they want to. But you at the Dixon saw it first.
So, welcome to our kitchen. And I'd like you to see this painting, which was another painting that we own by Rosalind Drexler. She had done the picture of the Beatles. And so this is actually the artist, Rosalind Drexler, with her friend. And I love this painting because you just see so much joy. They are having so much fun. And I just thought it was the perfect place here in our breakfast room to have it hang. So,
It goes great with pancakes. It really does. Howard James Little is from Memphis. He graduated from the Memphis College of Art before he went on to get his MFA in painting at Syracuse. And these are really three very important works of his. This is a series called the Homage to Harriet Tubman. And they represent Harriet Tubman as matriarch, as liberator, and as saint. These were very important works to James. He completed these back in 1987. They were shown once at a gallery space in 1987, and James back then had decided that he was not going to sell them. And so really they were put away. Susan and I were able to go to his studio a few years ago. We had met James, become friends. James and I have been to a number of jazz concerts together. And James was showing us his work. Like for instance, this year he had a show. It was just James and Louise Nevelson, the famous sculptress. And when I go into an artist's studio, I'm always asking about their older work. Artists always want to show you what they're doing right now. As a collector, I'm always looking for what they did a long time ago. And I noticed these. They were covered up and I kind of with sort of a wrapping, but I could see through them, and they looked very interesting. And so I kept asking James, and he kept, yeah, that's just stuff. He didn't really want to talk to me about them. But throughout our meeting and our conversation at the studio, I persisted, and I saw these works. Now, I was looking at these as just really beautifully saturated abstract works of art. It was only after James finally agreed to let me see these that he told me the importance of these works and how this was his really homage to Harriet Tubman, as I said. Would certainly be considered to be the most important African-American abstract expressionist painter when that movement became important in the 1950s, and his career went on into the 60s and in the 70s. Norman Lewis was with William de Kooning, with Pollock, with Franz Klein, with all those folks. He's in a very famous picture of all the renowned abstract expressionist artist in the Cedar Tavern. He's the only black man in that picture. But again, Norman Lewis, because he was black, was just not given the same renown. His fellow artists respected him, but not museums and not gallerists. Norman Lewis actually had to work as a taxi cab driver to be able to do painting. There's about, I think it's about 5 years ago, there was a major retrospective touring exhibition on Norman Lewis that went around the country. This painting was in that exhibition. It's featured in the catalog. So when we were able to acquire this, we were thrilled. But for us, Norman Lewis represents everything that we want this collection to be. It's just a recognition of great artists who were, for the reasons that we all know, left out of the discussion back during their time. Alma Thomas was from Washington, D.C. I would certainly say today that she is probably on the top of the list of any American contemporary museum curator in America. She is finally getting her just due for the greatness of her work. She was actually an elementary school teacher and really did not take up painting full time until she retired in her 60s. And for about a 20-year period, she just produced this incredible body of work. When the Obamas, when Barack Obama was president, the Obamas in their residence had an Alma Thomas painting put in the White House. So she is an artist, again, who was neglected, but certainly today is just come to the fore and is known for the greatness of her work and is at the very top of the canon. So we're very fortunate to have this work by her.
And so as we began in our foyer, we want to leave you in our foyer. And this is one of my favorite artists. Her name is Marcia Marcus. She was born in January of 1928 in New York City, grew up in Manhattan, got her MFA in 47, I believe, from New York University, and then went on to the Cooper Union, and then also to the Artist Guild. Did I say? The Art Students League, I'm sorry. Some of her contemporaries were Alex Katz, Bob Thompson. She was in the Delancey Museum. She was invited to come in by Red Grooms, who was a younger artist, and Bob Thompson. So these names you've probably heard. She just really kind of a bohemian in a way. She was right in the center of that avant-garde post-World War II energy, things that were going on during New York City at the time. And she loved her family, she loved children, she loved works that, as growing up, she wanted to be a fashion designer. And so you see fashion is very important in her work. She also, her images are flat. One person remarked that she can put so much into a painting and yet it doesn't feel crowded. So this painting was done in 1966. It's called Family and Art, and she took about half of the painting, and it's collage and oil on canvas, and I think I told you that was done in 1966. So this is her husband, and the resource that I used said that his name was Terrence Burrell. And then that's the artist, Marcia Marcus, her children, Jane and Kate. And it also said that she loved the idea of her subjects actually posing or performing for the viewer. And so she did this. Every time I look at this piece, I find something new. There's so much in this, so much in the collage. I love the way that they're all kind of looking at us as we're coming in, almost like maybe we've interrupted something that they were doing. She took this part of the canvas and had Jane and Kate paint, which I love. So this was obviously a family project. So anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed seeing what we've done here. Come here, Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we appreciate it, and glad again that all of you at the Dixon were able to be the first in here, and thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking with all of you.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was really awesome. Just awesome.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Did you see that cat cameo come across our computer?
Oh.
Fuzzy decided, you know, it was his big moment. So anyway, really an incredible tour.
Thank you.
You know, it's not a lot of people, I don't think, buy a whole separate house to show their art because they simply can't fit it in their existing house. You know anybody else that's done this?
We know people who put plexiglass up so that they could have more room.
Yeah, and I knew somebody with this killer apartment in Chicago who boarded up windows to hang more art. But
I asked.
You have to draw the line somewhere.
yeah, see, I mean, you kind of revealed the fact that, you know, that it is a separate house, that it's an art space,
Mhm.
really. And do you have any plans to will it be open?
Well, again, it is in a neighborhood, so we have to be
Yeah.
careful about that. I would love to somehow accomplish that. I would love to be able to bring students in.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about people possibly doing a fellowship or
Yeah.
using the art. So we're very open to it. We literally finished probably a few days ago, and we had the electricians here on Friday. So, I mean, it's taken so much longer than we thought. We thought we would be finished a year ago. So,
So, but yeah, and so possibly student groups or
mhm,
people like, you know, groups like the Dixon and that.
mhm.
Hey, can I take just a minute? I have to thank Kevin, so I will. But most importantly, I really want to thank Kristen Rambo and Sarah Lorenz and Chantel Drake for working with us to help put this all together. And I really appreciate their great efforts.
Absolutely. And let's not forget Anastasia on your end, who
Well, gosh,
did a
yes.
great job.
Anastasia's
filming
got a
this.
career as a filmmaker.
I mean, it was really quite cinematic in moments.
Yes.
So
Tears.
before I just have a few more questions of my own before I get to some from the audience. But you know, why does collecting art matter so much to you? I mean, why is it that, you know, it's clearly a passion, and clearly a passion that never stops evolving?
I think it's what you just said, Kevin. It's that whole process of discovery. And again, as someone who's always been a student of American history, I just feel that art is like a book. It is truly just another way to tell the story. It's another way to learn about history. And even art that was done, whether it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or 2 months ago, I think all of it is contemporaneous in the moment. I see so much in this art that, again, is 50, 60 years old, and the motivation of the artist and the struggle of the artist. And that's the United States of America that we all live in today. And so I think that's really that's the touchstone of art, that it's just always real.
Interesting. I mean, you always seem attracted to the underdog in a way, you know. I mean, regardless of which collection it is, but certainly it's true of the American scene painters. I mean, they were kind of underdogs in their own right. A lot of them painting out you know, in hinterland without the New York City glare. And now you're looking at these artists who, you know, you're absolutely right, are wonderful and not nearly as well known as they should be. Why do you think you're drawn to the underdog? Is it because you're from Cleveland and you're a Cleveland Browns fan?
That's even more so the Indians. No, yes. I love Rocky too. No. No, and it's also great to meet these artists. You know, we talked about James Little, who truly, as he is from Memphis. His family is still there. And to meet James, talk to James, who's about my age, a little older, but both because, you know, it's interesting with someone like James, who's an abstractionist. Not only is he African American, so that marginalized him. Well, as James told the story to me when he was coming up, African Americans were only supposed to do representational art. With, among other African American artists, you were sort of disparaged if you were doing abstraction. So James, as an artist, has really always loved abstraction and has stuck to it. So when you speak with them, you get a sense of the struggle, what they've had to do to get to where they are. And I just so admire people who overcome obstacles that many of us didn't have.
Yeah. Well, it shows in your collecting. I mean, you know, and in many ways, it always has been there. So tell me, if you have a preference. I mean, you know, you've really, in the last decade or so, maybe even before that, but certainly more programmatically in the last decade, moved towards the contemporary. I mean, do you prefer working with artists? And in terms of making acquisitions, do you prefer the studio visit to the gallery visit? And part two of that question is, how do you even find some of these artists?
Well, you know, I guess I would say that most of the artists we have works by are deceased. So it's still there. And even the living artists are, for the most part, generally much older. And so the hunt really comes, I'll tell you, I read a lot of, say, reviews like in the New York Times or other art shows. And if I see a work that is of interest, I will work to just track that artist down. The Jamal Peterman painting that we have, again, he's a young man, but a couple of years ago we were on vacation in Michigan, and I went to a show that in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I don't know what there were, maybe there was contemporary 50 artists there, and Jamal's work to me just stood out over everybody else's. So I found Jamal, you know, just through research, and contacted him and found out about him, and we did that. Many of the works that we have, most of them probably are from gallerists. I've just worked many years to develop strong relationships with galleries. So when something does come available, we're called. I'll tell you the couple of works, the couple Norman Lewis works we have. Susan and I were literally walking into Jonathan Bowe's gallery in New York as those were being put on the wall in his gallery. We were the first person to see them, and you know, we had a long-standing relationship with Jonathan, so we want them, and so we were able to get them. And anybody that would have been the first person to see those works who was a collector of that would have gotten them. The great Alma Thomas that we have, there's a gallery here in New York, a dealer by the name of Tom Pegg. Tom was selected to handle many of the paintings that have come from the Cosby collection. And Tom and I have a very long-standing relationship, spent a lot of time together. Again, when that came in, he called me first to see that. And, you know, I was just the first. So we were very lucky, but it's because of the relationship that we had with those galleries that we were able to acquire a lot of the works.
Right.
I have to say that John, he'll attend a show and he'll pick out a painting or an artist that he's really likes. And then he, like he said, he'll go after it. And we have like the Emily Chan Jane, with the draping, and
Mhm.
we actually went to her apartment in New York City, and she did a Chinese tea service for us. I mean, you just meet James Little. We went to his studio in Brooklyn and had the greatest afternoon with him, or actually it was late morning. And then we said, is there a good restaurant where we can grab some lunch? And he told us, and he said, I'm going to go with you. So Sylvia Snowden, who had the very large painting in the living room, that the yellows and the oranges, she's from Washington, D.C., and she invited us into her home, and we had a wonderful, and it just, so I think that's exciting.
I'll tell you a story
He's a
about
hunter.
Sylvia. Sylvia, we get done, we probably spent a couple hours with her. And she finally said, well, I know why you're here. And she goes, points at Susan, and she goes, I like you. She pointed at me, she goes, I'm not sure about you.
I feel exactly the same way.
I'll let Susan pick a painting.
Actually, that painting depicted her mother and father's wedding night.
Oh, wow.
All the energy, the emotion, the color. So you get the backstory. That's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I love collecting this art, because you get to sit with James Little and his wife, who have been up to St. Louis, and they're lovely, lovely people. She's an author, we have attended openings for Soul of a Nation,
Yeah.
and we've actually spoken with these artists. We've heard their stories, and we sat down. There was like an open lunch, and I waited until it was appropriate, and then I approached some of the artists, and they encouraged me to sit with them and just to talk with them and their experience, and
This is the real
all
secret
things
weapon.
came out.
Before it was done, Susan, they're hugging and they're all in tears.
Yeah.
And then
We were in tears, we were. But yeah, so anyway, that's an exciting kind of side effect or of something that goes into this.
Well, with artists like Wadsworth Jarrell, I mean, you're talking about, like living history,
Mm.
So, all right, I've got a few questions from the audience here. They're pretty tough. Get ready. We're fascinated by your ability to scoop MoMA. Are there any other museums in your checkered past, John Horseman, that you've scooped, or was that the first?
Well, yes, the Alma Thomas.
Well, the Alma Thomas was wanted by
Another.
the Cleveland Museum and Crystal Bridges Museum.
Sure.
And that I know because they had because people knew Tom had the Cosby collection, so they had done it. So that, but truly, I knew the gallerist that had the Purifoy. I wasn't even going into the gallery to see that. I was just going to the gallery, and I saw that. I was just blown away by that.
It's
And
incredible.
He told me, he said, the family wants us to go. It's on hold for MoMA. They've been in here. There have been 9 of them in here to look at it. They want it. And I kid you not, this was in the latter part of February. We were in New York. Maybe he was trying to sell me another painting by an artist named Timothy Washington. And so maybe we spoke after everything shut down. I was just talking to him. I said, well, what happened with the Purifoy? He said, well, MoMA's backed off of everything. And I said, well, can I? And he said, well, the family really wants to sell it to a museum. That's where they want it to go. I'm like, okay. But I said, will you check? And he sort of told them about this art space that we were putting together and all of that. And we were able to, I'm sure they wanted to sell it, the family, and they wanted the funds, but that really honestly was a fluke. And it was, no, we don't scoop museums. That was a lucky thing only because of COVID.
Well, here's a very reasonable question, I think. What are your future plans? Are there any other houses on your street per se?
No. No.
I actually had a neighbor approach us and say, she said, you know, I've been thinking that two homes does not a compound make, or do not a compound make.
But it's fine.
But
No,
it's fine.
no.
We're not, we're done.
Okay, but what about your future plans as, you know, as collectors? I mean, obviously, you're not done collecting? I can't imagine that you are.
Sock puppets, no. I mean, it's probably really just trying to refine
Yeah.
the collection. I think we need to add, we have a number of works, as I said earlier, by Native Americans and some here. So we probably need to add some depth to that part of our
Yeah.
collection. And much of it is just opportunity if something becomes available, is how we look at it.
You know, we just had the For America show from the National Academy of Design, and Mae Stevens and John Quick-to-See Smith were both represented in that show with obviously major examples. So it's kind of good to see that. I mean, you guys are always kind of been in the vanguard in a way of collecting and collecting, and as far as I'm concerned, some of the more interesting areas that you know the 20th century and 21st century has had to offer. And so, I mean, it made me feel good that we were still kind of that we hadn't been left behind in your wake by too much. You know, I have another question from the audience. And this is a good one too. Have you considered approaching PBS or BBC to share this collection with the world? I'm thinking, you know, I'm thinking that, you know, if not, you really should. And I would keep Anastasia as your cinematographer.
Well, they'd want her, they'd hire her away. You know, that's kind of someone to say.
Well, I mean, it's really true. And we've got, you know, the thing you're going to want to do is look at the chat feature, because there's lots and lots of comments on this Zoom that don't really come in the form of questions, but there's a lot of appreciation for what you guys have done as collectors. What you've done, you know, for the Dixon over the years is phenomenal. The great friend you've been to Aaron, and friends you really, you know, I can't wait to come up to St. Louis when things get better and lounge by that pool I could see through the window, you know, of number 11. And
kids love it.
yeah,
I
I'm
used
sure
to call it our pool house instead of our art house. It's our pool house.
It's a pretty nicely appointed pool house, Susan.
Thank you.
The collection is just incredible. And, you know, like I said, I really admire the fact that, you know, that you've remained open throughout your lives to different areas and different periods and different artists. And the other thing that I've always admired is that your collections have always been so well studied. And, you know, it's not, you know, I mean, it's not just, ooh, that's red, I love it, or ooh, you know, that there's always way more intention in any acquisition you make. And so our hat is off to Susan and John Horseman, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And thank you, Aaron.
Yes.
Thank you both so much.
Anything else you'd like to add before we sign off? We're getting close to the 8 o'clock hour.
Well, I just want to thank you, Kevin, Aaron, and the Dixon for believing in us in the beginning. I think that John went to the museum in Illinois and you met the first time, and,
Yep, that's
and
right.
then just your friendship blossomed from that, and you were instrumental in the tours that we had. And so just so grateful to you, the people at the Dixon. Every time we come down, you make us feel so welcome. And that's just a wonderful feeling.
Well,
And when life returns to normal, if any of you all are ever here, please, you're always welcome. And Kevin or Julie or someone will tell you how to get a hold of us. And we always will welcome anyone who wanted to come and see anything.
well, I can't wait to see number 11 in person myself. You know, I've only seen it from the outside, and it's pretty exciting.
Thank you.
Here's the deal for you. A rack of ribs from every rib joint in Memphis for an Alma Thomas. How about
I'll take that deal.
that?
I'll take that deal. Okay, you know what? We've had a little flurry of questions.
Sure.
Who's at the top of your wish list? Anybody in particular?
Gosh, I'm gone blank.
You know, truly, it's really, I would love to find a painting if it was one that, you know, was doable by an artist by the name of Jack Whitten. So if there was one thing that was on the top of my wish list that I think would help to fill out our collection, it would be a Jack Whitten.
You know, we've got your old pal Steve Reynolds on this Zoom, and you know he wants to know how much Ted Drews he'd have to buy you for that Alma Thomas.
Tell him we can always trade ribs for ice cream. That's always a deal.
And so, are you? So as you're buying, the collection's always so fluid. As you're buying, are you also selling? Are things going out as well as coming in?
We probably pretty much, we had that period there where we had a lot of the collection that we either donated to you, and we made a large gift to the St. Louis Art Museum, and things that we sold. But pretty much at this point, we're I would say stable, and there's really nothing more that we're looking to currently deaccession from the collection. So it's just adding now.
Good. Or not. I mean, it's you know, like I said, I've always liked the fact that that nothing ever seemed particularly precious. Now there are things in your collection, you know, in some of your collections that I've always been a little sentimental about, but most of those I now own. So
I love to come down to the Dixon and see the pennies we donated.
and when I say I now own, I mean, of course, the Dixon now owns. But anyway, John and Susan, you're the best. You really are. Thank you for giving us this tour and for sharing number 11 with us. And we miss you guys. We can't wait till we can see you in person.
Thank you. We'll see you all.
We feel the same.
All right. Thank you very much.
Good night.
And thanks everyone for being here tonight.
What do we do? Hit leave?
That was nice.
I'd like to look at the chat to see if there's anybody that I know that sent us stuff.
And I can